Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm going to be bringing you the Thank You Next book tag. I will leave the creator of this tag linked down below in the description box, as well as Downright Bookish, who very kindly tagged me. This is of course inspired by the brilliant and iconic Ariana Grande song Thank You Next, which has been playing repeatedly in my house since it came out. So yeah, I'm just going to jump straight into the questions, and the first of those is name a book that you said thank you next to. In essence, a book that you DNF'd, you did not finish. Now, I'm really bad at DNFing books. I always want to persevere to the end of the book. It's a habit that I really want to get out of. I really want to get better at deciding to DNF books. But I think even when I'm not enjoying a book, there is a part of me that wants to make it to the end and understand why I don't like it, but also understand why other people would like it. So I don't DNF books that often, but one that I did not finish this year was Perfect by Rachel Joyce. Now, I have read two of her other books, The Music Shop and The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, and I really loved both of those books. I'm not quite sure what it was about Perfect that it didn't gel with me. Maybe it was the time that I picked it up. My brain was a little bit full at that time. But I would like to go back to this one, but it's probably the most significant DNF for me of this year. So I don't think that's quite captured the spirit of the question, but it's the only answer I have. Next is name a book that taught you love, and for this I'm going to say You Sad Feminist by Megan Beach, and this is a phenomenal poetry collection that is all about the juxtaposition of wanting to be a political, empowered activist, but also really struggling with your mental health and how that can often make you feel quite incapable. Megan's writing is really powerful. It's quite a slam poetry style. There were a lot of things in this book that I related to, those themes of womanhood and mental health, but there are also a lot of political themes in there. There are moments in this collection that are very funny, and I would say this book taught me love in a number of different ways. First of all, I just loved the book. I loved all of those themes and the style that she writes in. This is probably one of my favourite poetry collections of all time. But it also taught me love in that, because I saw so much of myself reflected in a lot of these poems, it taught me not to beat myself up so much. It taught me that it's okay to love myself despite shortcomings or flaws, or what may be externally perceived as shortcomings and flaws. I just really, really love this book, and I think if you are trying to get into poetry, then I would really recommend this one. Next is name a book that taught you patience. And I think a lot of people are interpreting this question, probably rightly so, as a book that you had to persevere with quite a bit. But I'm gonna go for Sense and Sensibility by Jane Austen. I read this book over the summer, and it was one of those books that came to me at a really significant point in my life, and a lot of the themes in this really resonated with me. This book tells the story of two sisters, and it just sort of follows their friendship, and their friendship is really at the core of the novel, I think, but you also see them dealing with social struggles and romantic struggles. The reason that this book taught me patience is because one of the sisters, Marianne, she spends a lot of time in her bedroom sobbing. And at the time, that got me. And I think the reason this book taught me patience was because I recognized that it was really common to grieve the way that I was grieving at the time. Women have been experiencing that, and men as well, but I think women grieve in a slightly different way than most men do. There's some generalizations there, but I think I've seen women in my life experience grief in quite different ways to men because of how we're socialized. But I saw Marianne doing that grieving process, and I was like, if women were experiencing that all that time ago when Jane Austen was writing, it's okay for me to feel this way as well. It taught me to be patient with myself and just let myself feel whatever I was feeling and know that I was going to come out the other side of it. It's a great book. Would highly recommend. Next is name a book that taught you pain, and for this I'm going to say Almost Love by Louise O'Neill, which remains one of my favourite books that I read in 2018. Again, this was a book that I definitely saw myself reflected in, but very uncomfortably so. This is a book that follows a character named Sarah. It's told in the present day, but also in a series of flashbacks, and you begin to piece together why Sarah behaves so negatively towards a lot of people in her life. You look back at a relationship that she had years previously with a much older man and the power dynamics of that relationship and how it affected her. And there were just so many moments in this book that were extremely uncomfortable and painful for me to read, because I was like, oh yeah, I've behaved that way. Both like in terms of treating people negatively as a result of how I'd been treated, but also in terms of just putting up with a lot of shit. Like when someone you're seeing is like, oh, you one of those feminist types, and you just put up with it. And like the way she was pining for this older man's attention, it was just so uncomfortable to recognize ways that I had behaved previously just reflected back at me. It was just made me feel cringy at myself. Next is to name a book that you loved at the time you were reading it, but looking back on it, it wasn't as great as you thought it was, but it did also teach you some valuable stuff. And for this, I'm gonna say After I Do by Taylor Jenkins Reid. This is the first Taylor Jenkins Reid book that I've ever read, and I absolutely loved it at the time, and I went on to binge a lot more of her books, and I think she's probably one of the best writers I've discovered this year. I think I will just read anything that she ever publishes. I think she's fantastic. After I Do follows what happens when a couple decide to take a year off from their relationship. They will spend a year apart, they will not communicate, and they will come back together in a year and see if they want to try again. I don't know if I should have read this book when I did. I don't know if it was the healthiest choice that I've ever made. But in saying that, it got me through a really difficult day. I listened to this book on audiobook when I was travelling from Wales back to Dublin, and it got me through the day. It totally did get me through the day, and I don't know how I would have coped with that day if I didn't have a story that I was absolutely engrossed in. I think the characters were written really well. I think there were a lot of different perspectives on relationships, which I think was something really valuable. There's different perspectives from the main characters, both her mother and her grandmother and her brother and her sister. Everyone has a different point of view on romantic relationships, and I thought that was really great. Just looking back at it, I don't know if it filled my head with stuff that probably wasn't healthy for me at the time. I don't know. Anyways, next question. Next is name a book that you're currently talking to, meaning that you currently have the hots for. And for this, I'm going to say Normal People by Sally Rooney. By the time this video goes up, I probably will have finished this, which is quite disappointing. And let me explain why. So me and this book are definitely having like a steamy affair. I've been eyeing it up for ages. I've really fancied it, and I was so confident that I was gonna love it. And I've started this book now, and within one chapter, within one page, I was like, yeah, this is the shit. Such a ferocious book. It follows the relationship, and it's quite a confusing relationship. At some points it's a friendship, at some points it's purely sexual, at some points you wonder if it's going to become romantic rather than purely sexual, between Connell and Marianne. These two characters, they meet in secondary school or high school. Connell is very popular at school, whereas Marianne is a bit of a wallflower. There's that power dynamic there, but there's also a different power dynamic in that Marianne comes from a much more affluent background than Connell does, and Connell's mother actually cleans Marianne's house. Then they go off to university in Trinity College Dublin, and those roles kind of reverse in that Marianne becomes very popular and Connell is sort of seen as this kind of country boy that doesn't quite fit in. The writing in this is just spectacular. It's exactly what I want. It's shrewd, it's to the point, it's fascinating, it's addictive. It's so insightful into human nature, and I just really cannot recommend this book enough, even though I haven't finished it yet. I've really been trying to pace myself with this book. I could have very easily sat down and read this book in 1 or maybe 2 sittings, but I'm enjoying it so much that I've been trying to like ration it for myself because I just don't want it to end. So this is definitely a book that I've got the hots for. And finally, a book that's gonna last, a book that is so you, and a book that helped you love yourself more. It's gotta be Bridget Jones' Diary, doesn't it? I love re-experiencing the Bridget Jones story, whether it's in the form of rereading the books, particularly the first book, or rewatching the films, particularly the first film and the third film. I think Bridget Jones' Diary is truly going to stand the test of time. I think that it will become a classic novel. I think people could study Bridget Jones' Diary in years to come. Bridget Jones' Diary captures such a zeitgeist, and it captures the way that so many young women feel. I think it has way more social criticism and social analysis than most people give it credit for. And it was such a huge formative moment for me when I read Bridget Jones for the first time. I just truly think that it's gonna become a classic, and it's really gonna last, both for me as a reader, but in times to come. So that was the Thank You Next book tag. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my answers, and if you have any thoughts on anything that I've spoke about, do leave a comment down below. Also, all of the books that I've mentioned will be linked in the description as well, so if you want to learn more about them, please do feel free to go ahead. I may also tag some people down in the description. I might not do that, so just have a check anyway and see if I've bothered. Anyways, that's all from me today. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you in my next video.